Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled Finn and Lilou, a mouse's journey across cities, stars, and stories. Chapter 1, The Dawn Beneath the Bronze Boy. A soft breeze whispered through the leaves of Hyde Park as the mist of dawn curled like a lazy cat among the tree trunks. It was the kind of London morning where time seemed to pause, the clouds still deciding whether they would offer sunlight or drizzle. Underneath the statue of a boy who had never grown up, nestled in a patch of clover and damp leaves, a pair of tiny whiskers twitched in anticipation. A mouse, no bigger than a walnut, slowly poked his head out from a hollow beneath the statue's base. His fur was a silvery ash with streaks of tawny brown, and his eyes sparkled with that dangerous combination of curiosity and confidence. His name was Finwick, though his friends, few and far between, simply called him Finn. He stretched like a cat, gave a mighty yawn, for a creature his size, and climbed to the top of a root that jutted from the dirt like a crooked finger. From there, he surveyed his domain, the sprawling green of Hyde Park. Today was the day. He could feel it tingling in his tail. Something extraordinary was going to happen. Finwick wasn't just any mouse. He had a nose for wonder. Not cheese, not crumbs, not even warm corners, but wonder. Stories. Secrets. He had heard them in the whispers of old trees, in the laughter of children, in the silent gaze of the bronze boy above him. And today, his tiny heart thudded like a drum as he decided this would be the day he'd explore the city beyond the park. He packed his essentials into a walnut shell satchel, a piece of lavender, for luck, a sliver of pencil, for writing discoveries, and a raisin, for emergencies. Slinging it over his shoulder with flair, he scampered up the statue to get a final look at the world he knew. "Wish me luck, Peter," he whispered, touching the bronze foot. "I'm off to find stories." The city was still drowsy when Finn slipped through a crack in the wrought iron fence. Pigeons strutted like pompous royals along the sidewalk, and a street cleaner hummed a tune too old to remember. Finn darted behind flower pots, into boot prints, and past newspaper stands where headlines screamed of elections and cricket scores. He followed the wind, always a good guide, and it led him toward the distant toll of bells. Big Ben. Even the name sounded like a tale waiting to unfold. But before reaching the famous clock tower, Finn made a stop at Trafalgar Square. The lions, oh, the lions. He froze in place when he saw them, four giants crouching like stone guardians. From his size, they looked like dragons made of iron. Trembling and thrilled, he climbed the steps, dodging seagulls and camera-toting tourists, until he reached the paw of one beast. Perched on the edge of the paw, Finn grinned. "I shall name this the first mountain of the day," he declared. From here, he could see the city, red buses crawling like ladybugs, black taxis swarming the roads, and distant spires piercing the sky. He spotted the River Thames, a silver ribbon winding through the heartbeat of London. He also noticed something curious, a cluster of pigeons forming an arrow, all facing the same direction, toward a cobbled alley tucked beside an art gallery. He followed. The alley smelled of old paper and marmalade toast. On a low windowsill, a cat blinked lazily but didn't move. Finn crept past, heart pounding, until he reached a wrought iron gate half hidden by ivy. Behind it was a garden he had never noticed, overgrown, mossy, and utterly magical. He slipped through the bars, heart racing. In the center stood a sundial, cracked but proud. Around it, books lay in odd piles, soaked, chewed, opened to pages of forgotten poems. This wasn't an ordinary garden. It was a lost library. Finn wandered between the stacks, pawing at pages, finding words that tickled his mind. Adventure, myth, clockwork, moonlight. The books were silent but not dead. They were dreaming. And Finn, for the first time, felt he might belong to such a place. As the sun finally broke through the mist, a beam of light hit the sundial, casting a shadow that pointed toward a small hole at the base of the garden wall. Something stirred within him. This wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of something. A journey. A quest. A story. Finn tightened the strap of his walnut shell bag, took one last glance at the dreaming books, and darted into the hole. Whatever was waiting beyond, he was ready. Chapter 2, Bells, Guards, and a Glimpse of Gold. The tunnel behind the garden wall spat Finn out into the heart of the city, a place humming with purpose and bursting with movement. Towering above him, buildings lined the streets like sleepy giants rubbing their eyes. The scent of toast, coffee, and wet stone drifted through the morning air, mingling with the crisp tang of possibility. Finn blinked, adjusting to the brightness as he found himself on the edge of Whitehall, a place of power, suits, briefcases, and stories. Here, the rhythm of human life marched like clockwork, polished shoes clicking on the pavement, red buses hissing to a halt, guards standing like statues outside gates older than centuries. And there, rising above them all, was the mighty tower, Big Ben. To most mice, the idea of approaching a giant bell tower surrounded by tourists, guards, and street performers would be madness. But to Finwick of Hyde Park, explorer, storyteller, dreamer, it was destiny calling. He darted between the shoes of tourists snapping selfies, past a mime-painted silver who winked at him mid-pose, and reached the base of the Parliament building. The air here vibrated not just with noise, but with history. And then it happened. Bong. The first toll of noon thundered through the sky. The great bell sang a song of time, echoing in Finn's tiny bones. He stood still beneath the rose bush, watching the pigeons lift from the rooftops in a startled swirl. For a few moments, the entire world seemed to hold its breath and listen. Magnificent, he whispered. He wasn't alone for long. From a low shadow behind a wrought iron post emerged a sleek figure, a mouse, like him, but with a velvet scarf wrapped around her neck and the unmistakable air of someone who'd seen places and stolen pastries from royal kitchens. Her name was Lilou, They locked eyes. Recognition flickered. Finwick? She asked, blinking in surprise. Lilou? He gasped. I thought you were still in the tunnels under the opera house. She smiled mischievously. And missed the Queen's corgis chasing a goose across the royal lawn. I've upgraded my adventures. Finn laughed, the sound rolling off his whiskers like sunlight on stone. I didn't expect to see a familiar face today. Neither did I. But now that you're here, fancy sneaking past the guards for a peek inside Buckingham Palace. Finn's heart leapt. Are you serious? Do I look like someone who jokes about palaces? Without waiting for an answer, Lilou flicked her tail and dashed into the nearest bush. Finn followed, adrenaline singing through his limbs. Together, they weaved through hedges, crawled along gutters, and ducked beneath a rolling hot dog cart that almost flattened them both. They finally reached the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, glistening under the sun like something out of a fairy tale. The guards stood still, their tall, fuzzy hats swaying slightly in the breeze, rifles silent but intimidating. Music floated from somewhere within, the soft sound of a violin, faint and dreamy. Through there, Lilou whispered, pointing to a narrow storm drain. Inside was a world of marble and velvet. Finn gawked at the towering chandeliers, polished floors that reflected entire paintings, and walls covered in history. They snuck along the edges, blending into shadows, only pausing to admire a portrait of a queen whose eyes seemed to follow them. In the royal pantry, yes, they made it that far. Lilou uncovered a treasure trove of forgotten treats, crumbs of scones, drops of marmalade, a single cube of sugar that glowed like a diamond in the dim light. They feasted like kings. Between mouthfuls, they swapped stories, Lilou's narrow escape from a vacuum cleaner in a Parisian hotel, Finn's journey through a lost manuscript room under the British Library. Each tale made the other wide-eyed, then breathless with laughter. When they were done, they crept to a window overlooking the royal garden. Below, children ran after butterflies. Somewhere nearby, a guard sneezed loud and sudden. They froze. We should go, Lilou said, suddenly serious. Finn nodded. One more story for the memory box. They escaped just in time, ducking through a drain pipe as a corgi padded into the hallway, nose twitching suspiciously. Back in the safety of the alleyway, Finn turned to Lilou. Where to next? She shrugged, brushing crumbs from her scarf. Wherever the wind takes us. Finn grinned, eyes sparkling. Then let's follow the breeze. And so they did, disappearing into the London maze once more, two tiny adventurers with big hearts, chasing bells, stories, and the sweet taste of wonder. Chapter 3, The Inky Mischief of Pen Whistle Books. By late afternoon, London had changed its clothes. The morning fog had lifted, replaced by sunshine glinting off rooftops and rippling in puddles. Finn and Lilou moved like whispers through alleys and shortcuts, their tiny feet silent on cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of stories. "I know a place," Lilou said as they crossed under an archway. "A bookstore. Ancient. Dustier than a wizard's pocket, but full of secrets." Finn's ears twitched. "Books and secrets. You're speaking my language." They turned down a quiet lane where time had clearly decided to take a nap. Faded shop signs swayed in the breeze, and ivy curled around wrought iron fences. At the very end of the lane stood Penwhistle Books, its green door crooked and its windows misted from the inside. The bell above the door jingled as a tall woman stepped out, holding a tote bag filled with rolled parchment. Behind her, the door creaked closed but not all the way. "Just enough." "After you," Lilou grinned. Inside was a cathedral of paper. Stacks of novels, encyclopedias, poetry, and atlases climbed like towers of Babel. The smell was divine: old ink, dried flowers, candle wax, and just a hint of something magical. Sunlight slanted through stained glass panels, painting rainbows across the spines of forgotten first editions. They slipped under a rolling ladder and scaled a shelf labeled British Myths and Railway Schedules. On the third level, they found a cozy hollow between volumes of dusty romance novels. Finn sat down on a hardcover titled Love Among the Ferns and exhaled, "I could live here." Lilou peeked into a brass pencil case. "You might. But you'd smell like mothballs forever." While Lilou wandered off toward a stack of antique atlases, Finn was drawn to a desk in the corner. It was an author's nook, quills in an old tea tin, ink bottles in various shades of blue, and a thick leather-bound notebook open to a blank page. Curiosity crackled in his chest. Climbing onto the desk with the grace of a mouse who had once crossed a chandelier rope in Venice, Finn dipped his paw into a bottle labeled Midnight Plum. He hesitated, then traced a swirl on the blank page. A mouse-sized signature. His mark. Encouraged, he began sketching symbols: stars, mountains, a compass. Then he wrote, "All stories are doorways. I intend to walk through every one." Finwick. "Adorable," Lilou said behind him, tilting her head. "But you do know you're now leaving evidence." "Not unless someone's got a magnifying glass and way too much time," he smirked. But fate, as usual, had other plans. The bottle of ink tipped. Time slowed. It wobbled. It rolled. Then, splash. A wave of violet ink cascaded across the desk, down the side, and right onto the white scarf of an elegant mannequin seated by the front window. "Oh no," Finn whispered. Lilou's eyes widened. "You just ruined the shopkeeper's best display." The bell above the door jingled. "She's back," Lilou gasped. Panic snapped them into action. "Go!" Finn shouted, grabbing his bag. They bolted through a maze of books, over a teacup left on a footstool, down a book ramp made from stacked volumes of Wuthering Heights. They heard the door creak, the human footsteps pause, and then a scream. The mannequin's scarf. Ooh. The chase began. The woman, Pen Whistle herself, had surprisingly sharp eyes and cat-like speed. She spotted the ink trail and followed it, catching a flash of gray fur and a whip of a tail. Finn and Lilou tore through a dollhouse-sized diorama near the children's section, then slipped into a heating vent. Up or down? Lilou hissed. Up. Finn barked. They scurried up the shaft until they emerged breathless and ink-stained onto the roof of the bookstore. The sky had turned golden. The city stretched around them like an open map, glowing with opportunity. We almost died, Lilou panted, collapsing beside a chimney. But we didn't, Finn grinned, holding up the raisin from his satchel. Victory snack. She took half. You are incorrigible. And you love it? They lay there in the cooling air, the scent of books and ink still clinging to their fur. Far below, the bookshop owner muttered about ghosts and vandal mice. Finn rolled onto his back and watched the sky. Where to next? Lilou pointed toward the faint chime of a bell tower in the distance. Follow the sound. And with the setting sun behind them, the two adventurers vanished into the city once more, chasing echoes, dodging trouble, and turning even the simplest mischief into legend. Chapter 4, The Stage Lights and a Thousand Eyes. The city was humming with twilight when Finn and Lilou reached the theater. They hadn't planned to go there. In fact, their paws had been aiming for a bakery window. Lilou swore it had the best almond croissants this side of the Thames. But as fate would have it, the air had changed. A melody floated down the alleyway, soft, mysterious, like a secret whispered behind velvet curtains. Strings, distant drums, the echo of a rehearsal. Do you hear that? Finn asked, ears perking up. Lilou tilted her head. A cello. Rehearsing in minor. You speak music. She shrugged. I had a fling with the cellist once. He was a rat, but poetic. They followed the tune until the street opened up into a quiet square where the Royal Orpheum Theatre sat like a grand old lion, its golden letters glowing under the setting sun. Posters lined the facade, dramatic faces, swirling gowns, bold fonts shouting, "Opening night, the clockmaker's curse." What do you think? Lilou asked. Finn's eyes sparkled. I think we're going backstage. The side door had been propped open by a lazy stagehand on a smoke break. They slipped in, dodging laces of costumes and ducking beneath racks of shimmering cloaks. Backstage was chaos in the most theatrical way, dancers stretching like feline lightning bolts, prop masters shouting about missing swords, and a director arguing with a disinterested ghost light. Finn and Lilou moved through it all like living shadows. Costume room. Lilou guessed, spotting a pile of wigs. Or a magician's closet, Finn replied, admiring a purple cloak embroidered with tiny stars. They were halfway across the wings when a voice rang out. Positions in 5. Anyone not meant to be on this stage out now? A flurry of activity followed, but Finn didn't move. He had frozen, staring past the curtains into the vast, glowing ocean of the main stage. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Rows upon rows of seats fanned out like waves. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling. And at the center of it all the spotlight. A pool of golden light, waiting. He stepped forward. Finn. Lilou hissed. What are you doing? But it was too late. The music started. The overture soared. And Finwick of Hyde Park walked directly into the beam. A hush fell across the crew. Someone gasped. A lighting operator, confused but oddly enchanted, kept the spotlight on him. And for 3 perfect seconds, Finn stood in the heart of the theater, a mouse under the lights, back straight, eyes wide, heart pounding. He raised one paw and bowed. The audience, of course, wasn't there yet. But in Finn's imagination, the applause was thunderous. Then came the broom. A janitor, shouting something unintelligible, stormed from the wings. The chase began anew. Run! Lilou shouted, leaping off a coiled extension cord. They weaved through ropes, darted past a trapdoor labeled "Do Not Open," and tumbled into the orchestra pit. Trombones clanged. Sheet music flew. Someone screamed, "There's a mouse in the timpani." They crawled under a cello, hopped over violin bows, and escaped through a side grate just as a floodlight smashed down behind them. Outside, panting and covered in glitter and rosin dust, they collapsed on the stone steps of the theater. "I can't take you anywhere," Lilou panted, brushing a sequin off his head. Finn coughed. "I was magnificent. You were nearly skewered by a piccolo." He grinned, wide and unapologetic. "Tell me you didn't feel it too, that magic." Lilou stared at the theater's doors, still glowing behind them. "Maybe a little." They sat in silence as the orchestra continued inside, rising, falling, telling stories too big for words. Finn looked up at the stars peeking through the clouds. "We're not just wandering, are we?" he asked. Lilou raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We're following the stories. Like breadcrumbs. Each place is another page." She paused, then nodded slowly. "Then let's turn the next one." And so, with a new sparkle in their eyes and theater dust still clinging to their fur, Finn and Lilou vanished into the night, ready for the next tale waiting just around the corner. Chapter 5, Airholes and Eiffel Dreams. It all started with a box. Not just any box, of course. This one was special, lined with velvet, scented faintly of vanilla and paper roses, and sealed with a silver ribbon too grand for its own good. It had once held a pair of opera gloves, and now, by the twist of fate and a mouse's poor sense of hiding spots, it held Finn. Let's rewind. After the chaos at the Royal Orpheum Theatre, Finn and Lilou had ducked into an alley to regroup. Lilou had gone in search of something sweet. "I can't think on an empty stomach," she declared, leaving Finn to poke around a loading area behind a flower shop. That's when he found it. The box. Perfectly mouse-sized, warm inside, faintly humming with mystery. Naturally, he crawled in. Naturally, the lid closed. Naturally, moments later, a cheerful human assistant tied the ribbon shut, labeled the package for Madame Laurette, Paris, and loaded it onto a delivery truck. By the time Lilou returned with half a stolen donut and a frown, Finn was already en route to France. The ride was bumpy. Inside the box, Finn rolled into perfume samples, squashed himself between folds of tissue paper, and attempted unsuccessfully to chew through silk. Hours passed. Day turned to dusk, and then, with a shudder and a thunk, the box was lifted again. Voices in French. Scent of warm air and baguettes. The distant murmur of the river Seine. When the ribbon was finally untied and the box lid lifted, Finn blinked against the golden light pouring into the salon of Madame Laurette, a retired ballerina who now taught painting and drank hot cocoa at all hours. Her cat, Gaston, blinked lazily at the newcomer in the box. Finn did not blink back. He bolted. Down the table leg, across a rug that looked like it had once belonged to Marie Antoinette, and out the window, just barely making it between the shutter slats before Gaston gave chase. He landed in a flower box filled with lavender and flung himself onto a rain pipe. "Below, Paris," he gasped. Roofs like waves, windows glowing like fireflies, balconies draped in ivy. And in the distance, rising like a steel dream out of twilight, the Eiffel Tower. "I was in a theater this morning," he muttered. "Now I'm in a poem." He scampered across rooftops, down a stairwell, into a courtyard where a jazz band played for an audience of two, a man painting and a dog napping. He passed a bakery just as it closed for the night and managed to snag a croissant crumb the size of his torso. Paris, he thought, tasted like heaven and butter. Eventually, he found shelter in a bookstore near the Seine. It had open windows, books stacked like fortresses, and a sleepy tortoise who offered no protest when Finn claimed a spot between Les Miserables and Le Petit Prince. He curled up, nibbling the croissant, watching the river. "I need to find Lilou," he said softly. But instead of worry, his heart buzzed with wonder. This was how stories unfolded unexpectedly, beautifully. With lost boxes, pastry crumbs, and shimmering towers. Outside, the Eiffel sparkled for 5 whole minutes, a nightly magic trick. Finn watched it all, alone but not lonely, part of a world far bigger and more mysterious than he could ever have dreamed. And somewhere in London, Lilou held the delivery tag she'd found near the flower shop and whispered, "Paris." "Really?" She smiled. I'm coming, you ridiculous rodent. Chapter 6, A Garden Forgotten by Time. Paris held its breath as night unfolded like a velvet curtain. The stars blinked into existence, shy at first, then bolder, as if someone had tipped a jar of light over the rooftops. Down by the left bank, where cobblestone alleys curled like secrets and ivy whispered along ancient walls, Finn wandered slower now, the adrenaline of the day giving way to something softer. He had no map. No Lilou. No idea where he was going. And yet, for the first time in a while, he wasn't afraid. The city hummed with stories. Every corner beckoned. Every gust of wind carried the scent of something once treasured and half-remembered. And then, as he passed a wrought iron gate half concealed by climbing vines, something made him stop. Beyond it lay a garden silent, untouched, hidden in the fold of two buildings like a pressed flower between the pages of a forgotten book. The gate was ajar. Finn slipped in. Inside, the world changed. No sound of traffic. No footsteps. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl perched on a crumbling column. The garden was a patchwork of stone paths and soft moss, broken statues, and lavender gone wild. A marble fountain sat dry at the center, cracked by time but still proud. It felt like a place where stories came to rest. Finn wandered past flower beads tangled with moonflowers and rosemary, past benches faded by sun and rain. He reached a low stone wall where a fig tree stretched its limbs like an old dancer remembering her youth. He climbed up and sat on the warm stone. And breathed. Above him, the stars were sharp, infinite. The kind of sky that made you small in the best way. He pulled out the stub of a pencil from his satchel and the corner of an old envelope. Balancing it on his knees, he began to write. Dear Lilou, I'm somewhere between a dream and a memory. If you find this, follow the scent of lavender and the echo of fountains. I miss your sass and your daring and your stories about cellist rats. F. He tucked the note under a loose tile in the wall. Just in case. Then he lay down on the stone, paws behind his head, and stared up into the dark. A shooting star streaked across the sky. He didn't make a wish. He didn't need to. Because this moment of stillness in the middle of a runaway adventure was enough. The garden, somehow, felt alive. Not in a spooky way, but in the way that made you feel seen. Like it had been waiting for him. And as he drifted toward sleep, Finn felt something else stir inside him, not just the thrill of discovery, but something deeper. Belonging. Not to a place. Not even to Paris. But to the story itself. To the rhythm of the world that unfolds when you let it. When you stop chasing and start listening. And there, in the middle of an ancient garden forgotten by most, a small mouse slept beneath a fig tree while the universe watched over him, gently turning another page. Chapter 7, The Warm Waters of the Whispering Baths. Morning crept into Paris like a cat, soft, deliberate, and absolutely in control. Finn awoke to the scent of damp earth and rosemary, still tucked under the fig tree in the forgotten garden. For a moment, he lay still, letting the sunlight play across his whiskers. The wildness of the past days, the opera chase, the accidental delivery, the rooftop jazz had worn him thin. He needed rest. Real rest. The kind that seeps into your bones and whispers, "You're safe now." And so, when he wandered through an archway at the back of the garden and stumbled upon a structure half buried in ivy and thyme, it felt less like coincidence and more like destiny. The sign was barely legible. Just 2 words carved into an old marble slab: "Vain silencias the silent baths." Finn's ears perked. It was a Roman-style bathhouse, once grand and noble, now crumbling with age but still standing proud. Sunlight filtered through broken stained glass, painting the floor in shades of gold and rose. The air inside was warm, tinged with steam and lavender oil. Finn tiptoed forward, his paw pads instantly soothed by the heated stone. He passed columns etched with ancient vines, low benches lined with folded towels, well, napkin-sized for humans, perfect for a mouse, and bowls of dried fruit resting untouched on silver trays. And then he saw it, a pool, shallow and steaming, framed by mosaics of gods and goddesses long forgotten. He didn't hesitate. Finn placed his walnut shell satchel aside, slipped off his makeshift scarf, and climbed onto the edge of the bath. The steam rose around him like a dream. He dipped a paw. Warm. Silky. Inviting. He smiled. "I may never leave." He slid in. The water wrapped around him like a lullaby. Every ache in his limbs, every tension in his whiskers gone. He floated, belly up, eyes half closed, while distant harp music played softly from somewhere unseen. For the first time since leaving Hyde Park, Finn wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was simply being. A tray drifted by on a piece of wood. On it, a single slice of hot spiced apple, still steaming. Cinnamon clung to the edges like gold dust. Finn blinked. Is this a dream? If it was, he didn't want to wake up. He munched the apple in small, delighted bites, letting the warmth spread through him. It reminded him of winter fires, of stories told by candlelight, of days when the world was small and safe. After the bath, he explored the rest of the space, a meditation chamber tiled with sapphire stones, a reflection pool where tiny koi swam in spirals, a wall of ancient scrolls unread by human eyes. For centuries. He found a small nook behind a curtain, a reading room lit by a single shaft of sun, where lavender sachets lined the walls and rose petals dusted the floor. There, he curled up on a folded cloth and dozed again, deeper this time, healing. Hours later, Finn awoke to the chime of a distant bell. He sat up, blinking, and realized something had changed. Not outside. Inside. He felt centered. like the chaos of the world had moved outward and left his core untouched. Like the garden, the bathhouse had been waiting not just for anyone, but for someone willing to listen. To pause. He whispered, "Thank you." And though the baths offered no reply, the warmth lingered as if the building itself had heard him. Finn packed his satchel, gave one last look to the steaming pool, and stepped back into the light of the world cleaner, calmer, clearer. His story wasn't over. But now, he was ready for the next page. Chapter 8, The Mosaic Mansion and the Labyrinth of Light. The sun dipped low over Paris, casting golden fire across the Seine. Finn had dried off from the bathhouse, fur fluffed and spirit renewed. But the city wasn't done with him yet, oh no. Paris, like all great stories, knows when to whisper and when to roar. And right now, it whispered. He followed the sound, the soft murmur of pigeons, the clink of porcelain, the rhythmic hum of wind threading through ancient alleyways until he reached the edge of the 7th arrondissement. There, tucked between an ivy-covered embassy and a shuttered bakery, loomed a building unlike any he'd seen. A villa, no doubt. But not one that screamed wealth. It whispered memory. The front gates, once regal, were rusted open. The garden had grown wild sunflowers leaning like gossiping neighbors, ferns carpeting marble paths. And beyond it all, the mosaic mansion. That's what he would call it. Finn crept beneath the gate and into the estate. The walls of the villa were tall and pale, etched with fading murals of stars and ships. The front door stood slightly ajar, swaying with the wind like an invitation extended only to the bold. He entered. It was cold inside. Not unpleasant, just old. A silence hung in the air, thicker than dust. Finn tiptoed across a floor of intricate mosaics, tiny tiles forming great rivers, birds in flight, entire cityscapes if you looked close enough. It was a museum underfoot. Each step echoed history. The first room he entered was a library, though none like he'd ever seen. No books, but every wall was a tapestry. A timeline in stone and glass. Roman centurions etched in gold, a comet made of sapphire, a map of the stars set into the ceiling like a dome of prophecy. He stood in the center, dizzy with awe. "This place is alive," he whispered. And he wasn't wrong. As he moved deeper into the villa, the walls seemed to shift. Not literally but emotionally. One hallway was warm with orange tiles and sunlight pouring through stained glass. Another was cold and shadowed, depicting battles long past, knights, dragons, and creatures Finn couldn't name. He found a staircase made entirely of obsidian shards, curling upward like a spiral galaxy. He climbed it slowly, reverently, and reached the grand hall where the ceiling opened to the stars. A wind blew through the space, carrying with it the scent of candle wax and time. In the middle of the hall stood a circular platform, and around it 12 statues. Animals carved from marble: owl, fox, serpent, bear, stag, raven, and more. Each one faced inward, their eyes locked on the center. Finn stepped forward. The tiles beneath him clicked. One of the statues, the raven, let out a mechanical croak. Its wings shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a small alcove hidden in the wall behind it. Finn's heart raced. Inside the alcove lay a small journal, weathered and mouse-sized. Coincidence? Hardly. He opened it. To whoever finds this, you are not the first small soul to wander these halls. We are a secret society, not of humans, but of dreamers. We hide, we explore, we remember. And we leave behind clues for others like us. There was no name. No map. Just the message. And a drawing, a circle of animals, with a star in the center. Finn traced the image with one paw. He didn't know who had been here before, but he felt connected to them, to this place, to something greater than his own small journey. Hours passed as he explored each chamber, a sunroom where mirrors danced sunlight across the walls, a chamber of music with cracked violins hung like sacred relics, a dining hall with long tables set for a feast that never came. And finally the rooftop. He climbed a vine-covered chimney and reached the highest point of the mansion just as the Eiffel Tower began its nightly glitter in the distance. From here, Paris looked like a sleeping dragon, enormous, beautiful, ancient. Finn sat in silence, letting it all sink in. The mosaics. The journal. The statues. The sense that he had stumbled into a story that had begun long before him, and would continue long after. But for now, he was part of it. He took out his own stub of pencil and scribbled a line inside the journal. The story lives on. F. Then, as the stars claimed the sky and the last light dipped behind the Seine, Finn curled up between two mosaic tiles shaped like constellations, and slept. Beneath him, the mansion dreamed too. Chapter 9, Across the Bosphorus, the tower, the streets, and the sky. The wind was different here. Finn knew it the moment he stepped off the crate that had carried him unknowingly across countries, through train tunnels, onto a ship, and finally, to the edge of a continent. Istanbul. It smelled of cinnamon and sea salt, lemon and smoke, mystery and centuries. A city of lanterns and whispers, rooftops and shadows, where east and west held hands across the water like old friends who sometimes fought but never let go. Finn stood on the edge of a wooden pier, his paws trembling just slightly. Definitely not Paris anymore, he muttered. Behind him, the ship's horn bellowed its goodbye. In front of him, the city glittered not with the neat sparkle of Eiffel lights, but with a chaotic beauty. Towers poked through morning mist like daggers of history. Cats lounged in sun-warmed baskets. The call to prayer echoed from a dozen unseen minarets, wrapping around the breeze like silk. He felt out of place. Small. Slightly lost. But not afraid. Because if the mosaic mansion had taught him anything, it was this. He was meant to be here. Galata Tower. That's what caught his eye first. Rising above the old rooftops like a lighthouse of legends, it shimmered in the sun, ancient, majestic, slightly leaning like it had secrets too heavy to carry. Finn made it his goal. Getting there, of course, wasn't simple. The streets of Istanbul were alive not just with people, but with layers of sound and motion. Street vendors shouted in languages he didn't know. Tea steamed in curved glasses. Pigeons fluttered and the cats were everywhere. One calico watched him from a rooftop with mild disdain. Another, a chunky orange tom with a chewed ear, followed him for half a block, then lost interest when a cart of fish passed by. Finn weaved through spice markets, clambered up window grates, and once accidentally found himself trapped in a shoe store, hiding beneath a velvet boot while a girl tried on heels. Eventually, he reached the bottom of the hill where Galata Tower rose like a crown above the city. He panted. "That's a lot of stairs," he wheezed. The climb was brutal, 1,000 tiny cobblestones, uneven and steep. But Finn was nothing if not determined. He climbed. Rested on a tomato crate. Climbed. Hid in a loose drain pipe. Climbed more. Until finally, breathless and covered in brick dust, he reached the top. And everything changed. From Galata Tower, the city unfolded like a dream. The Bosphorus Strait shimmered, dividing the continents like a liquid ribbon of history. Mosques dotted the skyline like floating palaces. Ferries cut across the water like silver fish, and the rooftops below glowed in the sun. Finn sat on a ledge, heart full, tail swinging. This was a chapter worth remembering. But Istanbul wasn't done yet. As he descended from the tower, he found himself in the back streets, quieter, cozier, the kind of streets the city kept for itself. Laundry lines crisscrossed the sky. Old women chatted across balconies. Birds nested in clay pots. He passed murals painted onto brick, half-faded. A violinist played beneath an olive tree. Two kids chased a paper kite that danced like a dragon in the wind. And then he saw it, a narrow alley hung with clotheslines, scarves, rugs, old trousers swaying like flags of a secret kingdom. Finn smiled. "This," he whispered, "is where stories live." He climbed. First onto a stack of crates, then a windowsill, then a dangling rope that smelled like cumin and rain. He balanced on a laundry line, arms outstretched, above a courtyard where someone was roasting chestnuts. He walked the tightrope like a circus star, the entire city below him. And that's when he saw it. Across the rooftops, on the opposite building, Lilou. She stood tall and proud, scarf flapping in the wind, paws on her hips like she owned the skyline. Finn's heart leapt. She shouted something, the wind snatched the words, but he could guess. "You owe me a raisin." He laughed. Then slipped. The line jerked, he wobbled, and launched himself toward the next rooftop. He didn't fall. He flew. For a heartbeat, for the length of a blink, he soared, and landed in a pile of freshly laundered towels with a pomp. Lilou strolled over, smug. "Took you long enough. You followed me." "Of course I did. I'm not letting you have all the fun." They stared at each other, dusty, tired, ridiculous. Then burst into laughter. Below, Istanbul bustled on. Above, the laundry lines swayed. And between them, two tiny adventurers, reunited once more, prepared for the next unwritten page. Chapter 10, The Fountain, the Boy, and the Flavor of a Decision. By late afternoon, Istanbul glowed like warm honey poured over stone. The frantic energy of the morning had faded into something gentler, the kind of hush cities offer when the sun begins to tip toward the horizon. Birds perched on power lines like notes on a staff. A light breeze ruffled the towels hanging above alleyways. The air smelled of rosewater and roasted nuts. Finn and Lilou sat side by side on the edge of a stone fountain, their paws dipped lazily into the cool trickle of water flowing from an old brass spout shaped like a lion's head. The water wasn't strong, just a soft stream, steady and kind. Finn splashed his face and sighed. "This is the best part," he murmured. Lilou glanced over. "The moment of rest." He nodded. "The in-between. When you're not running toward or away from anything. Just still." They sat in silence, letting the cold water soothe their tired paws. Around them, the small plaza buzzed with quiet life, an old man sweeping steps, a dog napping under a fig tree, someone playing a reed flute in the distance. And then laughter. From the far end of the square came a boy, no older than 7, skipping along with a paper cone in hand. "Ice cream." He had already eaten half of it, and his chin wore the proof in sugary streaks. He danced across the cobblestones like he was the star of a parade only he could hear. Lilou smiled. "That looks like freedom." Finn tilted his head. "Or inspiration." They both watched as the boy plopped onto the stone steps across from them, devouring his gelato with joy so pure it made the air feel lighter. "What flavor do you think it is?" Finn asked. Lilou sniffed the breeze. "Lemon and pomegranate. Maybe rose." Finn's stomach growled. "Cruel." She nudged him with her shoulder. "What do you think he'd say if he knew 2 mice were watching his ice cream like it was treasure?" "He'd probably offer us a lick." They chuckled, then returned to silence. The boy dropped his spoon. It clattered on the stone. He blinked at it, then shrugged and kept eating, now with his tongue, much more effective. The spoon rolled across the plaza and came to rest near the fountain. Finn hopped down and tapped it gently. He looked at its curved edge, at the way it caught the light, at the faint imprint of the boy's fingers, and then, he spoke. "I think I know what I want to do next." Lilou raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me, O philosopher of spoons. He twirled it like a sword. We've chased stories across cities. But now, I want to follow flavors. Flavors. Think about it. What if every city had one true taste? Paris was buttery croissant. London was minty tea steam. Istanbul, spiced honey. Lilou's eyes lit up. You want to chase cities, through their food. He grinned. Not just food. Moments. Senses. Memories. I want to find the places where mice like us leave stories behind in crumbs, and drops, and scents no one else bothers to notice. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I like it. Really? It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's us. They clinked paws like glasses in a toast. Then Lilou stood. There's a gelato shop near here. Rooftop tables. Good views. Better crumbs. Finn hopped up. Let's go. As they trotted off, the fountain whispered behind them. The boy had finished his ice cream and was licking his fingers contentedly, not knowing his snack had just sparked the next chapter of a grand mouse adventure. They scampered through sun-dappled streets, climbed over tangled clotheslines, and finally emerged onto a tiled rooftop where parasols fluttered and the scent of vanilla and pistachio danced on the breeze. Finn turned to Lilou. You think we'll ever get tired of this? She looked out at the horizon where the minarets kissed the clouds and the sea stretched wide and endless. Not if we keep choosing joy. Chapter 11, The Gelato Guild of the Rooftop Realm. The gelato shop sat atop a clay-tiled building nestled between two minarets and a rooftop cafe with more cats than customers. It wasn't marked on any human map, and most people wouldn't know it existed unless they had a habit of chasing breezes up drain pipes and hopping between antennae. But Finn and Lilou, they belonged exactly here. As they reached the ledge of the gelato shop's rooftop terrace, a soft, heavenly scent wrapped around them like a blanket fresh from the sun. Pistachio, hazelnut, fig, rosewater. Lilou closed her eyes and inhaled. Smells like poetry in frozen form. Finn's stomach growled. The terrace bustled with life, not human life, but mouse life. Dozens of mice in silk scarves and tiny vests darted from crevices and hidey holes, each one carrying something delicious: pistachio shavings, biscotti crumbs, drizzles of syrup stored in nutshells. A red striped napkin had been repurposed into a long tablecloth. Thimbles of espresso lined the corners. Everything was miniature. Everything was glorious. And in the center of it all, standing atop a sugar cube throne, was a mouse wearing a monocle and a bow tie fashioned from thread. Welcome, he boomed, arms wide. To the Guild of Gelato. Lilou blinked. You've got to be kidding. Finn whispered, This is perfect. The bowtie mouse stepped down and bowed dramatically. I am Sir Basil of the Rooftop Realm, second spoon of the North Spire, founding member of the Frozen Tongue Society, and lifelong devotee of flavor. You had me at second spoon, Finn said with a grin. Basil gestured them forward. Please, join us. Tonight, we hold a tasting ceremony. A round of tiny applause erupted from the crowd. A little grey mouse wearing a pasta strainer as a helmet darted by with a tray of micro cones, each no bigger than a thimble. Lilou grabbed one. What is this? Almond fig swirl, the helmet mouse chirped, infused with saffron and regret. Regret. Only the best kind. They were ushered to the head of the table, Finn on a coaster turn cushion, Lilou on a spool of thread. Before them, dish after dish was served. Lavender chili sorbet, cold fire on the tongue. Pomegranate rose gelato, like kissing a memory. Salted honey pistachio, sharp and soft all at once. Finn was in heaven. Each flavor was a story. Each bite was a map. The mice around him debated the merits of toasted cardamom, the social impact of overfreezing, and the philosophical weight of texture. At one point, a mouse poet stood on a spoon and recited, "To melt is to be vulnerable. To freeze is to hold on. But to swirl, to swirl is to belong." There was cheering. Toasts. A duel using dried vanilla beans. And in the middle of it all, Finn felt something shift. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was part of it. Lilou leaned over, licking her paw. So, still think this was a silly idea? He shook his head slowly. This is the best terrible idea I've ever had. They laughed, and Finn raised a gelato cap in toast. To the flavors that guide us. To the stories we taste. And to never, ever saying no to dessert. Hear, hear. Basil shouted. Let the stars taste what we taste. The celebration stretched long into the night, under fairy lights made of firefly jars and moonlight dancing across linen sails strung between chimneys. Music, a pan flute and something resembling a mouse-sized mandolin drifted on the breeze. And when the last dish had been licked clean, and the last note of music had faded, Finn and Lilou curled up in a folded napkin near the edge of the terrace. Do you think they'll remember us? Finn asked sleepily. Lilou stretched. They'll taste something someday, some flavor no one else understands, and they'll know we were here. Finn closed his eyes. That's enough. And with bellies full and hearts fuller, the two adventurers slipped into dreams beneath a curtain of stars and a sky that smelled faintly of rose and vanilla. Chapter 12, The Tiny Studio and the Hands That Remember. The next morning arrived on the breath of a cool breeze, carrying with no the scent of clay, old wood, and something else, something that smelled like purpose. Finn stretched from beneath a leaf blanket on the rooftop of the Gelato Guild, blinking at the first rays of sun filtering between clotheslines. Below, Istanbul stirred to life. Vendors rolled carts onto the street. The call to prayer drifted gently above domes and pigeons. Lilou yawned beside him. What now? Finn tilted his head, eyes scanning the skyline. I think I smell paint. Lilou smirked. You and your nose for trouble. And so they went scaling walls, riding a forgotten scarf down a line like a zipline, tumbling into a potted rosemary bush, and finally, arriving at the edge of a strange, squat building nestled behind a forgotten courtyard. It had no sign. Only brush strokes on the walls, great swirls of color, miniature murals layered atop one another like memories refusing to fade. Finn pushed open a loose wooden panel. It creaked. Inside, magic. The place was alive with movement, yet no chaos. It was like stepping into a quiet mind, a space where everything had been touched by care. There were shelves of miniature sculptures carved from old buttons, walls covered in canvases the size of leaves, and a table in the center where a dozen tiny mice worked silently, with focus and grace. The air buzzed not with noise, but intention. One mouse, wearing a threadbare apron covered in splashes of color, looked up. You're early, she said without turning. Her voice was soft, like brushes against canvas. Early for what? Finn asked, awed. The mouse dabbed her paw in blue paint and flicked it expertly onto a seashell canvas. For the part of the story where you learn to make something of your own. Lilou looked at Finn. She's got your number. They were invited in without fanfare, simply handed tools. Finn received a brush carved from a sparrow's feather. Lilou got a needle dipped in molten wax. No one gave instructions. They just watched. One mouse sculpted an entire carousel from bottle caps and wire. Another was stitching patterns into dried petals. A third mouse painted a single portrait, over and over, onto acorns, each face slightly different. It was meditative. It was mesmerizing. Finn sat at the table. A blank square of bark sat before him. He stared at it. What's the point? He finally whispered. The apron mouse turned to him, her eyes kind and tired. The point is not what it becomes. The point is that you were here. That hit something deep. Finn dipped the feather into ink. He painted not pictures, but moments. The fountain and the boy with the gelato. The stars above the lauded tower. The golden windows of the mosaic mansion. Each stroke steadied him. Lilou stitched the outline of a fig leaf, her thread winding gently like a trail across time. For hours, they worked. Not speaking. Just creating. And when they were done, the apron mouse gently took their work and placed it among dozens of others into a scroll case the size of a milk jug. Why keep them? Lilou asked. So others know they're not alone, the artist replied. Sometimes, you don't need to be found. You just need to be seen. Finn looked around the studio, the quiet chaos, the warm light, the smell of beeswax and paint. It felt like the inside of a memory. He whispered, "Can we stay?" The mouse smiled. No one ever stays. But you can always return. They left with ink on their paws, wax on their fur, and a quiet fire lit behind their eyes. Outside, the wind felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because they had. Chapter 13, The Library Beneath the City. The rain came without warning. One moment, the sky was the soft silver of late afternoon. The next, clouds spilled open, and Istanbul was awash in sound, 1,000 rooftops clattering underwater, clotheslines flapping like startled flags. Finn and Lilou ducked beneath a wrought iron bench, panting and laughing. "I smell thunder," Finn said. "I smell wet fur," Lilou retorted. They waited, tails curled, until the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the city exhaled again. The streets shimmered. Windows blinked with reflections. The scent of stone and stories soaked the air. They took cover in the doorway of an old building with broken shutters and a wooden sign worn so thin by time that only one word remained, Kutuphain. "Library," Finn read aloud. Lilou's whiskers twitched. "You sure?" "I read everything. Even forgotten signs." The door groaned open on rusted hinges. Inside, the world held its breath. It was no ordinary library. There were no shiny computers or squeaky carts. No humming lights or late return warnings. This place was carved of earth and time, a subterranean warren of stone chambers stacked with books so old, the pages curled like petals. Dust danced in the shafts of golden lamplight. Some shelves were carved directly into the walls. Others balanced precariously on barrels and crates. Scrolls lay coiled like sleeping snakes. Glass jars held letters sealed with wax. A stack of mouse-sized books rested beside an ink pot the size of a teacup. "This place," Finn whispered, "is alive." Lilou was already climbing a stack of tomes, tracing the spines with a reverent paw. "Histories of wind," she murmured. "Maps of forgotten skies. Odes to lost fires." Finn turned a corner and found a circular room where the floor was entirely made of books. Not resting on it, made of it. Thousands of volumes pressed together, spines facing up, like some quiet mosaic of knowledge. He stepped carefully, the titles whispering beneath his paws. "The cities beneath the cities. The Society of Mice Who Vanish. The Tapestry of Tales. He knelt beside one with a familiar symbol, a crescent moon carved into its leather cover. When he opened it, the smell of cedar and cloves spilled out. Inside, paw-drawn maps. Notes in margins. Sketches of towers, baths, markets, and rooftops. "Someone's been tracing our path," he whispered. "And there a name. Lilou." He turned slowly. "Lilou, this book. It's yours." She froze. Her eyes didn't meet his. She stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, like walking toward a memory. "I thought I'd lost it." "You wrote this?" She nodded. "Long ago. Before I ever met you. Before I thought stories were for someone like me." Finn opened to a folded page. It was a drawing of two mice, one holding a lantern, the other a compass. Lilou said nothing. But her eyes shimmered. Finn understood. She had been on this journey before. Alone. Searching. And now, somehow, he had walked into her story, or maybe she into his. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "I thought, if you knew I'd already been here, it wouldn't feel like yours." "Lilou," Finn said softly, "stories aren't cages. They're doors. And the best ones. We go through them together." They stood in the heart of the library, surrounded by centuries of voices. And for the first time, no words were needed. Later, they found a low chamber lit by a single lantern. The shelves here were different, labeled not by genre, but by emotion. Wonder. Solitude. Regret. Belonging. Lilou placed her old journal under Hope. Finn, now holding a blank scroll he found earlier, tucked it under Becoming. As they left, the rain had stopped. The city glistened, fresh and still. But something inside them had shifted. The past didn't weigh them down now. It walked beside them. And ahead, the road waited unridden once more. Chapter 14, The Meadow of Memory and the Reunion That Waited. The city faded behind them, soft as a sigh. After leaving the hidden library, Finn and Lilou had decided without speaking to go somewhere quieter. Somewhere the wind didn't carry the weight of stories waiting to be told. Somewhere that didn't smell like ink, iron, or ice cream. They followed a winding rail line out of Istanbul, clinging to the undercarriage of a train that clacked steadily across the countryside. Fields rolled past in golden waves. Trees blurred like brush strokes. The sky stretched, wide and forgiving. By dusk, they reached the village. It wasn't marked on any map. No human signs, no billboards. Just a small scattering of stone cottages, fields blooming with wildflowers, and a lazy river that looped through the land like a contented ribbon. They disembarked with aching paws and dusty fur. Finn looked around. I think, this is it. Lilou tilted her head. The middle of nowhere. The center of peace. They wandered into the field. The earth was soft. Bees moved slowly between blossoms. Cows blinked at them with lazy curiosity. A windmill creaked in the distance like a lullaby. And then, Lilou. A voice. Familiar. Warm. From between two stalks of wheat, a mouse stepped out, older, rounder, with fur going gray at the edges and a gentle limp in her back leg. Lilou froze. Aunt Merla. She breathed. The older mouse smiled, eyes misting. You haven't changed a whisker. Finn stepped back, giving them space. Lilou ran to her, and they embraced, tails entwined, foreheads touching in that way mice do when words aren't enough. Merla led them to her cottage, a round stone thing with moss on the roof and windows that glowed gold from within. Inside, the smell of thyme and baked grain filled the air. They ate stew from walnut bowls. They sat beside a fire made from dried lavender stems. Merla told stories in a voice like drifting smoke of ancestors who carved maps into mushrooms, of dances beneath meteor showers, of letters sent by sparrow post. And when Finn asked why she lived alone, Merla only smiled. Because here, even silence has something to say. The next morning, Finn awoke before dawn. He stepped outside. The meadow was wrapped in mist. Everything felt suspended. He wandered to the river and found Lilou sitting alone, watching the water. Trouble sleeping? He asked. She shook her head. Too much peace. It's deafening. He chuckled. Yeah. Weird, huh? A pause. Then she said, I used to come here every summer. With my parents. Before they disappeared. Finn said nothing. I always thought, she continued, that one day I'd come back and find a message from them. A stone they carved. A pattern in the wheat. Something. She looked at him, eyes searching. Is that foolish? He shook his head. It's hope. And that's never foolish. She smiled softly. They sat in silence, side by side, paws brushing. And from somewhere in the sky, a lark sang. Later that day, they helped Merla in her garden. They harvested mint, dusted shelves, learned how to catch dew in seashells and store it for dry nights. Will you stay a while? Merla asked. Finn looked at Lilou. Lilou looked at the horizon. And then, gently, just one more night. Because they knew this peace was a pause, not an ending. Tomorrow, they'd return to the road. But for now, they belonged to the field, the fire, and the old mouse who still believed that stories could live in wildflowers. Chapter 15, Beneath the Starlit Sky Whispers, Wishes, and the Road Ahead. The wind shifted that evening. Not in a way that could be seen. There were no sudden gusts, no swirling leaves, no howling through tree branches. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of shift you only notice if you've been still long enough, the kind that slides between your fur and settles in your chest. Finn felt it first. He stood at the edge of Aunt Merla's herb garden, watching the horizon burn orange and gold as the sun tucked itself behind the rolling hills. Lilou joined him, brushing dirt off her paws. "You feel it too?" she asked. He nodded. The ending of a moment. She exhaled, long and low. "Yeah." Merla, ever perceptive, had said little that day. She simply packed them a satchel of soft bread, dried figs, and a small glass vial of something labeled moon drops, then kissed Lilou gently on the forehead. "You'll know when to open it," she said, cryptically. That night, Finn and Lilou climbed a hill on the far edge of the meadow, not a big one, but high enough to see the stars without rooftops or laundry lines in the way. The grass was tall, soft, and filled with glowing fireflies that blinked like the city lights of another world. They didn't talk at first. They just lay back, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the endless sky. Above them, constellations shimmered, the Mouse King, the Longtail, the Sugar Star. Lilou broke the silence. "If you could go anywhere, and I mean anywhere, where would you go?" Finn thought. Not a place, exactly. More like a feeling. "I want to find the place where stories begin." She chuckled. "That's vague." He smiled. "That's adventure." "And what would you do there?" "I'd sit under a tree and listen." Lilou looked up. "You know what I wish?" "What?" "That we didn't always have to leave the good places behind." He turned to her. "Maybe we don't. But we do," she said. "The rooftop guild, the studio, the library, they're all behind us now. Or, they're inside us now." She blinked. He continued, "What if we're not leaving things? What if we're collecting them? Carrying them forward like pages in a book?" Lilou was quiet. Then she said, softly, "I don't want to forget any of it." "You won't," Finn replied. "You've written it into your whiskers." She laughed, a quiet, breathy sound, like starlight on water. The fireflies rose around them. A shooting star carved the sky. Lilou whispered, "Make a wish." Finn closed his eyes. He didn't wish for safety, or for fame, or even for the next great tale. He wished for courage. Courage to keep going. Courage to stop when it was time. Courage to believe that what he carried inside was just as valuable as the things he saw outside. When he opened his eyes, Lilou had sat up. She was holding the vial Merla gave them. The moonlight hit it just right and it glowed. "I think it's time," she said. Finn nodded. She uncorked the bottle and poured a drop onto the grass between them. The world tilted. Only slightly, like a page turning. And then a memory bloomed. A projection of light and scent and sound, like a dream pulled from time. They saw Merla as a young mouse, dancing under the very same stars. They saw Lilou's parents, holding hands beside a fire. They saw a younger Lilou chasing lightning bugs in the very field they lay in now. And then, they saw themselves. Climbing rooftops. Drinking dew from leaves. Staring at paintings. Escaping from a theater spotlight. But not as they were. As they were becoming. The light faded. Silence returned. And Finn understood. "This hill," he said, "isn't a resting place." Lilou looked at him. "It's a crossroad." They stayed there till the sky faded from black to blue. When the first birds sang, they stood. Shook dew from their fur. Packed their things. Finn turned to the east. "There's more out there." Lilou turned to the west. "And more behind us." They met eyes. Then smiled. And together, without speaking, they walked forward into a future not yet written, but already beloved. Chapter 16, The Mist Bridge and the Story No One Ever Told. They walked all morning. Through rolling meadows kissed by dew. Through groves of fig trees that whispered in forgotten dialects. Through long silences that felt more like music than emptiness. By midday, the path changed. Stone gave way to moss. The air turned cold and thick, like breathing through parchment soaked in memory. And then, suddenly, they saw it. A bridge. Suspended between two cliff faces, stretching over a gorge so deep it seemed to echo into time itself. The structure was old, older than any city they had visited, older than language, older than fear. Made not of rope or wood or stone but of woven light and mist. Each thread shimmered with 1,000 reflections, memories, shadows, glimpses of lives not yet lived. Lilou stopped. "What is this place?" Finn stepped forward, eyes wide. "The end of one world." She blinked. He corrected himself. "Or the beginning of another." A small sign hung from a rusted nail on a nearby tree. The words were etched in trembling script. "Only those with unwritten endings may pass." Lilou touched the sign gently. What does that mean? Finn's voice was quiet. It means we still have stories left in us. As they stepped onto the bridge, the world disappeared. Not fell away but folded, like pages turned by a slow, invisible hand. Mist curled around their legs. Their paws made no sound. Below them, stars. Above them, stars. The bridge stretched not across space, but across possibility. And then, halfway across, they saw him. A figure faint, wavering like heat above a candle. It was a mouse. Elderly, cloaked in a patchwork of feathers and parchment. His eyes glowed not with sight, but with knowing. He didn't speak. He simply raised one paw and gestured toward a bench carved of moonwood. They sat. The old mouse opened a book, blank pages, hundreds of them. He slid it to Finn. Finn touched it. Nothing happened. Lilou touched it too. Still blank. Then the old mouse spoke, his voice like pages rustling in a windless library. Every story ends twice. Once, when it's told. Again, when it's forgotten. Finn swallowed. Are we supposed to write it? The mouse nodded slowly. But we don't know what happens yet, Lilou said. The mouse's eyes twinkled. Exactly. He vanished. Left alone, with the book between them, they stared at its blankness. Finn finally whispered, "What if we get it wrong?" Lilou shook her head. Wrong doesn't exist here. Only untold. Finn took the quill. He wrote. Once upon a mist. Two travelers stood on a bridge made of light, carrying all the pieces of the places they'd been. Lilou added. And the echoes of stories they had yet to find. Together, they chose not the shortest path, but the one that led beyond the final page. When the book closed, the bridge lit up not brighter, but truer. The mist peeled back like curtains at the end of a play, revealing a new land ahead. Mountains of glass. Rivers that whispered. Cities where the buildings bent to listen. Stars that moved when you called their name. It wasn't the end. It wasn't the beginning. It was the beyond. Finn turned to Lilou. You ready? She smiled. I've been ready since the rooftop gelato. He laughed. And together, they stepped off the bridge into a story that no one else could tell, because it was theirs. Chapter 17, The City Among the Stars Where All Stories Meet. The first thing they noticed was the quiet. Not silence, no. The air was alive with sounds, but quiet in the truest sense. A stillness of the soul. The kind that said, "You've made it. For now, you may rest." Finn and Lilou stood at the foot of a winding road, paved in soft light that shimmered like moonlit dew. The mist bridge had vanished behind them. Ahead, stretched beneath the canvas of a galaxy-spattered sky, lay a city unlike anything they'd ever seen. It floated. Not in the air but between moments, suspended in time like a pause before a heartbeat. The towers curved gently like the stems of growing plants. The streets rippled like water when walked upon. Trees grew from rooftops. Lanterns drifted through the air like lazy fireflies, each carrying a story trapped in its glow. Lilou whispered, "Is this real?" Finn took her paw. "If it's not, then let's dream a little longer." As they entered, no one stopped them. No guards. No gates. No signs. Because no one needed to stop them. They belonged. The mice here didn't live in holes or under floorboards, they lived among the stars. On balconies of floating books. Inside blossoms that opened to reveal warm dens. Beneath domes where the constellations shifted when you spoke their names. And every mouse had something. A scroll. A painting. A jar of captured laughter. A spoon that glowed when stirred through silence. Artifacts of memory. They passed a courtyard where 3 elders wove golden thread into the sky. A child mouse danced beside a fountain that sang in harmony with her steps. 2 friends etched their names into a walnut shell and launched it into the wind. Everywhere, connection. They reached the city's center just as a chime rang out, a sound like wind and bells and a page turning. A platform rose from the ground. Atop it stood a book. But not a normal book. It was their book. The one from the mist bridge. Now larger. Bound in stardust. Glowing faintly, as if alive. And it was open, waiting. An elder mouse in a robe of woven twilight stepped forward. "You may finish what you began," he said. Finn looked at Lilou. She nodded. Together, they stepped forward. Finn rode first. They traveled across cities and stars. Not to chase stories, but to become one. Lilou followed. And when the journey brought them here, they realized all the stories they loved were just echoes of each other. The book pulsed. The words sank in. And then slowly the book turned a page on its own. A blank sheet. But this time, they didn't fear it. They celebrated it. That night, under a sky so clear it felt like glass, the city gathered. There was no speech. No performance. Only presence. A silent, collective acknowledgement of the journey. And at the center of it all, Finn and Lilou sat atop the tallest spire, paws wrapped together, hearts full. "Do you think it ends here?" Finn asked. Lilou leaned into him. "I think, it begins again. He smiled. Then we better rest. Tomorrow, we write the first line. The stars blinked. The lanterns floated higher. Somewhere, a distant melody drifted upward, the song of mice who once wandered, once wondered, once wished, and were never forgotten. Chapter 18, The Return Home, where the story lingers. Time didn't pass the same way in the city among the stars. The stars whispered hours, not minutes. The breeze carried seasons inside single breaths. And memories didn't fade, they settled, like dust upon old wood, becoming part of everything you touched. Finn woke in a bed shaped like a curled leaf. He turned to see Lilou still asleep beside him, her breathing calm, her scarf gently rising and falling. For the first time in a long time, there was no place to rush to. No map to follow. No path to chase. And yet his heart stirred. It wasn't restlessness. It was completion. They had come far. Farther than he'd ever imagined. But home was still waiting. They left that afternoon. The city didn't stop them. It didn't ask them to stay. Because it understood journeys only matter when you know how to let them go. The librarian elder gave them a new book, blank again, but this time not for fear, but for freedom. You may not return to the same world, he said, but you'll return as someone the world no longer forgets. Finn and Lilou stepped back onto the path that led out of the sky. And walked. They journeyed through lands they'd never mapped. Across rivers that sang their names. Over mountains made of old stories piled into stone. And slowly, gently, the stars dimmed behind them and the blue of a morning sky returned. When they reached the edge of Hyde Park, Finn stopped. The statue of the bronze boy still stood there, Peter Pan, pointing skyward. But something about it was softer now. Less eternal. More human. Finn looked down at the hollow beneath the roots, the place he had once called home. It looks smaller, he whispered. Lilou touched his paw. You've grown. The park was alive with voices. Children chased each other. Birds bickered in branches. A radio played a jazz tune from a nearby bench. Finn and Lilou sat beneath the statue, just as they had never done before. I used to think adventure meant leaving, Finn said. Lilou smiled. It does. But now you know it also means returning. They sat in silence. Just listening. That evening, the sky burned orange over the trees. Finn stood up. Pulled out the new book. Opened to the first page. He looked at Lilou. Ready to start again? She nodded. Let's write it slowly this time. And so they did. They wandered the streets of London not as strangers, but as cartographers of wonder. They left tiny paintings in cracks of sidewalks. Placed folded stories under cafe tables. Whispered riddles into museum vents and carved poetry into the bark of old oaks. They didn't chase stories anymore. They planted them. Sometimes, they returned to places they once passed. The fountain where the boy had eaten gelato. The bookstore with the ink stain. The rooftop where they'd once flown. They left pieces of themselves in each one. Quietly. Gently. No longer trying to hold on to adventure. Just letting it continue without them. And in the end, it wasn't the cities that changed. It was them. Finn no longer needed to prove he was part of a story. He knew now. He was one. Epilogue. Years later, a young mouse named Lilou chanced upon an old walnut shell beneath the statue of Peter Pan. Inside was a note. If you're reading this, then you're standing where our story once began. And maybe, just maybe, yours is about to. Signed simply, F and L. She tucked the note into her satchel. Looked toward the city. And smiled.